I'm Adam Howard.
And we are the co-founders of Ascended Consulting.
And we want to welcome you to the Ascended Workplace, where we turn generational challenges into leadership wins by creating systems of accountability.
Today's episode is called From Classroom to Boardroom: Why Accountability is the Missing Link for Gen Z in the Workplace. So Adam, talk to us just quickly about what that even means.
So what we're noticing is that there's been an uptick in conflict in the workplace between Gen Z and accountability created by their managers and their bosses. Not even necessarily just blaming Gen Z. There's an issue with the systems themselves and how they're being implemented. And it's causing conflict, specifically with the older generation trying to work with the new workforce.
Spectacular. So as we approach this, we come to it from a little bit different perspective, because we're both coming to it as former educators. And so what we noticed in the school system, we both became extremely discontent working within the system because we saw problems and processes that were actually damaging students, and those outcomes are what employers are now seeing. So we both left education. I was there for over 18 years, and Adam, you were there for?
I was there for 9 years.
9 years. So we've put in our time, and we really understand this generation and these students, and we understand what has shaped them. So because of that, in this episode, we're going to be able to explore how accountability, or actually it's like the lack of accountability, how that shaped Gen Z, and why CEOs should care, and what they can do to fix it in their workplace. And of course, we're here to support them and help them create those systems. So when we look at this, what are some of the common pain points that we're hearing CEOs share when we talk to them?
Right. So a big one that comes up a lot is there's big issues with communication, specifically how professional that communication is coming out, and just the initial reaction to starting communication. There seems to be a lot of talk of people being scared to communicate.
Yeah, a lot of anxiety.
Anxiety about, yes, yeah, for sure. So we really want to open up the lines so that people can talk freely to each other in the workplace.
Yeah. In
a professional setting, because that's what's missing right now, is that professional aspect.
Absolutely. And then I also hear a lot of people talking about, they really lack initiative and that drive that used to be a little bit more innate within people. At least we thought it was innate, but it was actually something that had been developed in them over the years that wasn't developed. It's not the individual worker's fault. It's their product of the system in which they were raised, right? So that what's perceived as a lack of initiative really is just conditioning to how they approach work.
Mm-hmm. And that lack of initiative leads to what is perceived as resistance towards feedback, which we're going to talk about it later, but what we're really going to find is that there isn't an innate resistance to feedback. It's that how it's being approached, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But that resistance to feedback is coming up a lot from the different people that we've been speaking to.
Absolutely. And then we also hear about this generation having unrealistic expectations around the idea of promotions and perks. Like, they feel like they don't really have to do a lot to get rewarded. Like, they really feel like they're entitled. It would be another word that people have. Like, they're entitled to, if they just do the bare minimum, that they should be getting promoted for doing bare minimum. And so we'll talk more about why that is and what we can do about it, but just kind of right now we're identifying those pain points.
That participation trophy mindset.
Mm-hmm. And then the last one, I think, is this idea of, like, because they become discontent when they don't get the rewards immediately, or they're getting feedback and they feel like people are being super critical of them, there's high turnover and people see it as low resilience. They're just so quick to walk away. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at what does that mean for the business. When those are the problems, the pain points, how does that impact the business outcome? So Adam, you want to address that?
Yeah, so these problems are creating huge concerns for these companies. Right off the jump, they're just not producing what they need to. So productivity is decreasing in a very intense way. As a result of that, too, they're having onboarding costs because there's such a high turnover. As the people are being quote unquote upset about feedback or upset about the communication, that's creating people leaving the positions, and then those onboarding costs. It costs so much more to hire someone instead of develop someone, right? So those onboarding costs are absolutely throttling these businesses right now as a result of this. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then of course that impacts the culture of the workplace when there's this underlying feeling of discontent, both from these younger team members and their managers. And then also it's hard to create like a consistent culture when you have that high turnover rate. So I think something that we really need to start to help companies and leaders understand is that these aren't just personality quirks. These are the symptoms of a system that never taught them accountability and how to function in that world. And so that's kind of where we're going to come in. But first, we're going to help people understand the root cause, the school culture that really lacked accountability. Because I don't think people who are outside of the school system really have a full picture of what happens within the school system. So can you talk to us a little bit about, I don't know, let's start with grade inflation. What does that even mean, and what might be causing it?
Yeah, so grade inflation is really taking all over in public schools right now. Really what grade inflation is as the test scores, specifically SAT and ACT scores, are reported lower than they've ever been, the grades of students are actually being reported higher than they've ever been. So the GPAs, the average GPAs of both math and reading classes in high school are being reported higher than previously. So these students are getting a false sense of I'm achieving when realistically they are not. They're not actually meeting the standards. So we see that those grades are increasing. And there's systems that are creating this grade inflation, like there's school systems that have absolutely no zeros. There's a no zero policy, which means that if they are enrolled in the class, they receive at least a 50% on the assignment with no work required, no attendance required, no work required. And as a result, there's less failing. Their grades are higher. They're graduating. And then they're approaching the workplace from a stance of, if I sometimes don't even have to show up.
Right. I'm on the payroll. I must deserve to get paid.
Exactly. I'm on the payroll. I must deserve to get paid. And that statement has been ingrained for school. I taught in middle school, and there's that rule where you have to call the parent before you can even give them students have to have these different things in place to fail, and even then they're going to get moved to the next grade. So grade inflation increases, and students are thinking that they're doing well when really they're not meeting expectations, and they don't even know that.
Yeah, one thing that used to drive me insane was this lack of ability to hold a student to a deadline, right? And because in the real world, you have to meet deadlines, and it would crush my soul to just continue to, because I felt like what I was doing was lying to them when I said here's when something's due, and then they wouldn't turn it in on time, and I wasn't allowed to take any points off. I wasn't allowed to say this is the absolute drop dead deadline until the quarter ended. That was the only time you could have a real deadline. So kids could turn in something from, the very first assignment from 9 weeks ago and turn it in and get full credit. And so they just are so used to not having to actually meet deadlines, but that's because that's the world that they grew up in, that they could turn something in 8 weeks past when it's relevant and still get full credit for it. And now you plug them into the workplace and you ask them to have a project done by a certain point so that others can do the next step and utilize it and move forward, and they don't understand why they have to have it done on time.
And it even translates back to when we talk about communication, because they didn't actually have to even communicate to get an extension. Right. There's the old thought of you have to go and ask for an extension. That doesn't even something you have to do. They just have to turn in the assignment by the end of the marking period. There's no communication with the teacher. And again, that's what we see and hear from workplaces, which is the same thing of there's the lack of the initiative for the communication. Well, the school systems have been creating that system for a long time by making it so you don't even have to necessarily ask for the extension or communicate that you're falling behind on an assignment. You just, whenever you can do it, you do it. It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so the schools have just removed any friction whatsoever, any discomfort for the student within that process. And now employers are dealing with employees who've never even faced any friction, because now, the employer's hey, I really need this portion of the project completed. And the student's like, why are they on my back? Why are they, well, not student anymore, the former student, the team member, they're not understanding why their manager is on their back about this. And they just feel like, why are they riding me so hard? Why don't they like me? And they really just start to see themselves, some people, as the victim of like, oh, why are they on me all the time? Instead of really understanding like that they have some ownership in this, actually a lot of ownership, that they should have the ownership.
Exactly.
And they don't actually know how to do that because they've never been really asked to own their success because everything is handed to them, hence great inflation and all of that.
Right. So then what CEOs are seeing in the workplace is that outcome of the years without those real standards and that follow through.
Yeah, so what do we do about that, right? That's the big question that employers are asking. And we're sitting here saying, we know because we actually knew within the school what should have been happening all along, and we just weren't allowed to do it. And I would say, I mean, all of those policies and things came from good intentions, right? We have a chapter in a book we're working on, we call it The Quiet Harm of Good Intentions.
Right.
You know, schools really were trying to do things to help out different students from different populations and backgrounds and things, but it turns out that what they were doing was creating more damage.
Right.
And so now these young adults are entering the workplace and they don't know what to do, and their managers and supervisors, they don't know what to do. And that's where we really come in, because what accountability, there's like this misconception, especially with this younger generation. And the misconception is that accountability is punishment.
Right.
Right?
You're mad at me.
Yeah, but really it's structure, it's clarity, it's follow through. And something I started saying, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I don't know when I began saying it. But I started to combat that mindset within the school system originally by telling people, no, accountability isn't mean. Accountability is love. Because the most loving thing you can do for someone is to hold them to a standard and then help them to get there. Instead of saying, I don't think you can make it, so I'm going to lower the standard, right? Because then they never reach the levels that they should be able to reach.
Right.
Right? So like accountability truly is love. And we'll talk about in other times in a future episode, accountability is equity, right? And honestly, accountability is profit, right?
Yes.
There are all kinds of ways that we can identify accountability is truly a positive. And so we have to stop viewing accountability as being mean and harsh. And we have to help this generation understand that, but we also need to help our managers and the people who are in charge to communicate that as they implement systems of accountability.
Right.
So what does a strong accountability system look like? Just kind of give us a taste.
Yeah, so when we're thinking about a strong accountability system, it goes right back to what you were saying. There has to be clear expectations of what is expected of the employee to be successful in that workplace. And a lot of times those expectations become cloudy and they become hard to follow, and sometimes they're getting mixed messages from either other employees or other managers. And without the system in place to fall back on, those expectations become not clear very quickly.
Yeah,
so,
and sometimes I think that people think they're implied, right? But if it's not directly stated, not directly communicated, and there's no like follow through on it, then it just all breaks down. Right.
And that comes back to, the follow through comes back to, there has to be consistent performance feedback, not just the yearly review. It has to be consistent. It's what Gen Z is asking for. It needs to happen on a regular basis, and it needs to be assigned to those expectations. That's where the fallback comes from, when the performance reviews or the performance metrics are not aligned with the goals of the company. It just creates discontent, and then you have the high turnover because people don't understand what they're being assessed on.
Yeah, they think they're working towards one target, and it turns out that all the energy they're putting in this direction isn't even in the right direction. And they're like, why aren't you giving me credit?
Right.
You know, I'm doing these things, and the employer's like, what are you talking about? We wanted you doing these things.
Right.
And at that point, it's like too late.
Yes. Yep.
So, yeah, consistent performance metrics within those clear expectations.
Yeah, and lastly too, I think to create an accountable system, There has to be on both sides of the management perspective, no matter where the employee is in the company, there needs to be an ownership of results, which are both good and bad, and that needs to be built into the system of the company. How are we owning our good results? How are we owning our bad results? That needs to be standardized and modeled, standardized and modeled, and it needs to be a system for that, because if one person does it one way and it comes up somewhere else, again, that disconnect is going to create a lot of frustration.
Absolutely. So Gen Z really craves clarity and fairness, and that's exactly what an accountability system will provide them. So there's some thoughts about like, how does this truly play out and how does it truly work? And I think we'll get into that deeper in another episode. But I think we've kind of hit the key points there. So, you know, accountability isn't just for the employee. It protects the team, it protects the culture, and it protects the bottom line of that corporation.
That's it.
And so we've really got to, you know, assess as a culture within an organization, what are you doing to hold, like, what are your expectations and how are you holding people to them? And is that standardized across the board? And how can you implement something that's more consistent, more clear, and just more timely? I think and then we talked about, just like we mentioned it, right? But when someone isn't meeting the standard, what does it look like to provide them the support they need?
That there. High support, right? It's got to be a requirement.
High standards, high support. And I think if we can help companies, which I mean, I know we can, help companies embrace that and really create systems that function to create that culture and that atmosphere, it becomes so second nature and so normative that everyone loves it, because all of a sudden everyone's in line, everyone's moving in the same direction, and people know where they stand and what they need to do to get to where they want to be or to continue to perform at the level that they're at. So what is it that you would say that Ascended Consulting offers that's a little bit unique?
For myself, I think for both of us, for Ascended Consulting, we come into it understanding the mindset and the systems that were already in place that your workers have started with. And we understand what it takes to be able to hold those workers accountable. And again, like you said, accountability is love, it is not punishment. So holding those workers accountable is going to lead to a better culture, a better workplace culture, and that's going to really allow us to support.
Yeah, we don't have to guess how Gen Z thinks, because we helped to shape them for good or bad, right? Because we were part of that system. So now we help corporations and nonprofits and schools. Right now it's how to help corporations, because we're talking about the workplace specifically, not the schools. But we help organizations manage them now. And so that's what we are going to bring throughout this whole podcast. And, you know, so should someone choose to bring us in, we can make a very customized approach for them. But we're also going to share a lot of tips and tricks and behind the scenes secrets right here as we continue on the Ascended Workplace.
You don't have a Gen Z problem, you have a systems problem, and we can help you with that.
So if you want to know more about how we can help you solve that problem, you can check us out at ascended-consulting.com. And from there are links to all of our socials, and there's a contact form, of course. So we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you for listening.